thank you for Friends of Bangor to put this wonderful event on, and also to you, Stefan, for all your hard work. I'm amazed how much you've done for us, so thank you very, very much. Yeah, and a warm welcome to everybody, croeso, as we say here in Wales. And it's lovely to see so many familiar faces, friends and family, and also all those people I don't know as well, so welcome. I'm very thrilled to see the people I've worked with. I've had such close ties, so I'm very touched. Just before we start, I'd just like to take a moment to breathe. So we're just going to, if it's okay for you, closing your eyes or have them lowered, and just focusing on sitting here. It's just a sense of arriving in your seat, arriving to my talk and to this whole evening. And just noticing your breath in this moment. Now I'm going to carry on. And I also really like to acknowledge the privilege I feel of doing the launch with Jody and Francis. It's interesting because we've spent a similar amount of time, Jody and I, and Francis as well, writing the book and occasionally comparing notes. And Jody's included one of my poems in her book, and I've got one of hers. So there's been quite a lot of sharing as well. We used to teach together, and I've been on courses with both Jody and Francis, so it feels like a very intimate occasion for me, and I'm really honoured. So we all live in North Wales, so we've had a lot of friendship as well as working opportunities. And Jody and I are both privileged to be amongst the founding teachers of CMRP, Centre for Mindfulness Research and Practice at Bangor University. And we were there from the beginning. So in those days, meetings were in person, not virtual. So that was a different experience. And now everything's virtual at the moment. So yeah, we're moving into a different times. And we've all seen the centre through many changes. Very many. So I'm going to talk about my inspiration and motivation for writing the book and how the book works. And I will read from the book, and I'll finish with a short mindfulness and compassion practice. So my motivation, I've taught many people the 8-week course, mindfulness stress reduction course in North Wales with Bangor University. And many people said that the course transformed their lives. But then when I met them later on the street or it's a small community, so you can bump into people. So many people said that they didn't practice anymore. And it was almost like a confession, a sort of shame that they didn't do it. And that led me to inquire further, and particularly in my master's dissertation. And looking at the follow-up with students, how people responded to practice later on, or what they thought about mindfulness. So I did a qualitative and a quantitative research. And my findings actually confirmed my thesis that most people do need support to start a mindfulness practice and also to continue this practice of deep awareness. So, So I taught on the Masters in Mindfulness program, as Stefan said, on the foundation module. And the foundation module was very much about people's personal practice and linking that to the theoretical mechanisms of mindfulness. And so I learned so much from my students. From their in-depth study, I learned about how it is to be human. So this practice has been around for a long time, and I'd like to quote a 13th century Zen master called Dogen, who says, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. So the foundation was that very much studying of the self in light of the mechanics of the theoretical underpinnings. The students were their own laboratory, and this was an enormous inspiration for my book. I remember teaching with David Elias, who was a special mentor for me at the Centre for Mindfulness Research and Practice, and he said, you must find your niche, Annee. And I did. This book is a result of that. And it's a deep interest of how we can practice to be more present in our lives, to be more aware, to be more compassionate. I started writing the book as I prepared my first Staying Mindful course. It was a 6-week course. So my husband John had gone off for a walking holiday in the Himalayas, and I had time to write my handouts, and the handouts got longer and longer. So I think we can thank John for my long handouts, because obviously too much goes on when he's around. So I did that foundation there. And there was much I wanted to say. I wanted to share the wisdom I'd gleaned from the Buddhist teachers and psychologists I'd read, I'd met, and also from my students and colleagues, and from poetry and stories that I discovered. And this is my favorite aspect of the book, this magpie quality, as Stephen said, which I included in my book, of picking up the interesting pieces, the jewels. So, and I've also, which I really like as well, included stories and poems from people I know in the area, to local people, and also my own. And illustration from friends. And this is a dear friend, Sarah, who did this, this photo. And I just thought it was perfect for the book. So, and I want to read from the book now, from, it's a poem that I read when I was working alongside Sarah, who's doing her master's, her master's in art. And she was doing work on moral compass. And so I wrote this poem, No Compass, which is also the same poem that's in Jody's book. No compass. Where do we go from here? What is beyond? Not knowing, I am fearful and ask for certainty, or at least a compass to solid ground. There is a station existing between two tunnels. You must travel through darkness to arrive there. Keep along the tracks when the sun goes down, carrying all you can. No straight line to awareness. The only currency is kindness. What is beyond imagining? Summer in midwinter, snow on a hot June day, God in heaven, no solid ground. What is beyond bearing? A world without you, the death of a child, leaving home. The sun is weak in January, but you will be safe in the woods. Some call them the dark woods. The moss is a carpet of stars, clothing the trunks of trees. alongside ivy and lichen. There are no wolves, only foxes. When you stumble on the stream, follow it by sound to the river and all the way to the sea. I am determined to stay on the path, alone in a strange country, beyond sun and shadow, with no compass. So I'm now going to talk about how the book works. You can see that I've included poems to illustrate points. So my aim is that most people, whether they've got a mindfulness practice or not, can pick up the book and find something to interest them. So in that way, you can just open the book at any page and read it. There are standalone pieces, stories, and links, and poems. Or we can follow it from page 1 and give some time to reflect on each chapter. So every chapter has a theme and practices and activities to explore that theme. And Mark Williams suggested to me that a modular approach would be useful in such a book. So giving ourselves time to stay with and explore aspects of the book, certain themes, when they seem relevant to certain times in our lives. Or we could treat it like a course and devote 1 week to each chapter, reflecting as we go. So the last chapter, chapter 11, is the course outline with session plans for teachers. The rest of the book is very much for individuals. So the group exercises are at the back. The first 3 chapters follow the Jon Kabat-Zinn quote: mindfulness is paying attention in a particular way on purpose, in the present moment and non-judgmentally. So the first chapter explores what it is to pay attention on purpose and what is intention. What is the intention for our life, in our practice? And how can we live with more awareness? So John Peacock says, your intention is really important. It needs to be refreshed and examined regularly. We embody the intention to stay awake. There's an old story attributed to an indigenous North American about feeding wolves. It illustrates the power of where we place our deepest intention. In the story, a grandmother tells a granddaughter that she has 2 wolves fighting in her heart. The granddaughter says, what wolves? She says, one is the wolf of hate and one is the wolf of love. So she asks what is the wolf of hate? So the wolf of hate is resentful, angry, mean, all the horrible things that we have inside us. And the wolf of love is the kindness, the compassion, the calmness, all those things that we aspire to or hope for. So the granddaughter says, well, which wolf wins, grandmother? Which wolf wins the fight? The grandmother says, the one I feed. So the intention to feed the right wolf, to notice. So both Jody and I have got wolves in our books, and I think they might be an inspiration for both of us. So in chapter 2, I look at how we pay attention and what stops us. So if motivation is so important, how can we so easily lose the motivation to be attentive? To pay attention means we care, which means we really love. The 3rd chapter is our attitude to life, how paying attention in a particular way leads to less stress and can be liberating. So how to develop, how to work on cultivating certain qualities like patience and non-judgment, to name a few. And that can be effective in leading a happier, a more meaningful life. So the 4th and 5th chapters are particularly relevant to where we are today, affected, as we all are, by the pandemic. So these chapters address working with difficulty and working with anxiety. So many people come to my courses citing anxiety as a reason for coming, and that was before COVID-19. Now, mental health problems mental ill health problems used to affect 1 in 4 of the population. I believe that is rising all the time now at this time. And the suicidal figures also have gone up 200%. So hopefully these chapters will be useful for helping people around the difficulties of this time. Compassion is a way to work with suffering, whether it's yours or another. And the next chapter, chapter 6, explores this heartwarming, heart-opening practice. So it considers the importance of making friends with yourself and others, the tender gravity of kindness. The Dalai Lama, whose birthday it was yesterday, was 86, it's going well, famously said, "My religion is kindness." And surely at this time, we're seeing kindness in action, especially the NHS. So that brings us to chapter 7, which is about interconnection. So we consider in this chapter how we are in relationship. The reflection that our early conditioning affects the way we treat others. And this has also been explored to great effect at the moment by the Black Lives Matter movement, where asking us to challenge our conditioned responses. In this chapter, I also observe the danger we as a species are in from climate change. Touching upon it in this chapter links to into my intention to sharpen my awareness of what can possibly be done to avert a disaster of apocalyptic proportions. And chapter 8 is on gratitude. Certainly the limitations of fear and grief of this lockdown has increased anxiety, as I said before, and I know it's increased my own. But the threat of illness and possibly death has amplified my sense of gratitude. So when I wake up in the morning, it's like, oh, still alive, still here, not ill. So it hangs over this uncertainty about our life. Life has always been uncertain, but now it seems more. There's considerable research on the effect of gratitude and that it can have on health and well-being. So I go into that a little bit as well in the book. And chapter 9 is about how we can support ourselves with finding like-minded people, teachers, and form groups, support groups, reading books, and possibly going on retreat. Chapter 10 is a lovely chapter with 6 stories of how staying mindful has helped people through ME, chronic illness, pain, aging, and family problems. And there's also a fantastic interview with Becca Crane and Cindy Cooper about Cindy's practice in helping her live with terminal cancer. It's very inspiring. Sadly, Cindy's now died and we miss her. But I'd like to finish this bit with her quote from her. "Another thing this illness has taught me is gratitude," she says. "A great deal of gratitude." And now I'm going to read a little piece from the book. Also has gratitude in it. So, again, book. So, in my 60s, I went to the Himalayas with my husband John and a group of 4 friends and a trekking company called Beyond the Limits. I should have been warned. It was hard work, but the beauty of the Himalayas is truly compensated for aching legs, blisters, and uncomfortable conditions. It was heavenly. So much pleasure, so much freedom. Just walking under vast skies in the sunshine. It was easy to be in the moment. The senses so alive. But a story usually needs a dark side or an element of risk, and this one is no exception. In my case, we arrived rather too quickly at high altitude and had difficulty breathing and, in fact, moving at all. To go down, as advised in the manual, would take another 6 hours, which was impossible as we had taken all day to arrive at our night stop. The only habitation was within a day's journey. So we crawled into the village after dark, our hands and faces freezing. Fortunately, we were met by a Tibetan woman who held my hands to warm them and took us into her kitchen where she was cooking on a wood fire. I loved that woman. I had heard stories of people dying in their sleep at high altitude, so I slept in all my clothes with the windows open to get as much oxygen as I could. It was so cold. And yet, miserable as I was, I noticed how many stars there were and how bright. At dawn, awake because it was so cold, I saw a beautiful sunrise over the iconic Fishtail Mountain. After a day or two, we'd somewhat acclimatized and we set off even higher. After resting for a few days in Nar, a remote village with no access by road, only a footpath, we set off on ponies to trek over the Kangla Pass, 5,322 meters high. Even the ponies struggled at this altitude. Then the puffing ponies went home and left us to ascend to the very top on foot. It was impossible to walk at a normal pace. We shuffled up. Such was the effect of altitude. It was even slower than mindfulness walking. That's saying something. Short of breath, I struggled up to the top of the world. I could see the whole of the Annapurna range all around me. But for once, I did not want to linger and appreciate. I felt awful physically. I was also terrified. Following my breath, which was short and painful, was my only option. Heart pounding, limbs barely able to move. This was one of the few truly life-threatening moments I have ever experienced. I inched down the other side of the mountain. My lowest point, I sat by the guide and cried. I'm dying, I thought. On top of the physical discomfort, there were the extra emotional layers. I felt a failure, the deep shame of being mortal, the shame of being weak and not making it. I sat there on the barren, scree slope and felt disappointment that I wasn't cool about facing death. Where was the self-compassion now? Is it the culture, or is it just me that feels shame around illness? And in this case, my own death on a lonely mountain. In that moment, I was still alive, but my energy, my headspace was taken up with self-doubt, anxiety, disappointment, and yes, anger. I was angry with my companions who'd sped off into a more comfortable breathing space. I felt abandoned and unloved. This story didn't end in my death, so I can't know what my thoughts would have been had I actually been truly dying. It's interesting how many emotions were present in this life and death situation. So many thoughts about who I am. The main ones were, I don't want to die here. I want to see my children, my grandchildren, my friends again. Not this now. This sense of loss and sadness was the strongest feeling. This longing to see my loved ones again has left me with a lasting sense of gratitude that they're in my life. Gradually, I began to notice these thoughts as negative thoughts, extra and unnecessary. The fear, the shame, the disappointment, and the anger, all wrapped up in the story of me. I was able to bring some compassion to myself, an absolute appreciation for that which I'd taken so long for granted, my breath. This in and this out breath, and then, oh joy, this in breath again. No matter how short. I joined my friends whose love and concern was overwhelming. Someone took my bag. John hugged me, and with their help, I made it down that very steep mountain. Again, more gratitude. We are mortal. It's humbling. We must make the best of it while we can. For the rest of the trek, I felt enormous gratitude. So glad to be alive. So in love with the beauty of the Himalayan people and the landscape. So appreciative of my friends and family and my companions on the trek. So, we're going to practice now for a few minutes. I'm just wondering, I'll just check with Stefan how long I've got now. Stefan?
You have 10 minutes, yeah?
I have 10 minutes. Okay, lovely. Thank you. So, if you'd like to make yourself comfortable, sort of sitting securely in your chair, and just taking a moment to really feel yourself here, feeling your feet on the floor, your bottom on the seat, just allowing it to support you, just easing into the support of the chair, the floor, and the earth itself. As it were, you're being held here. And noticing your breath. This breath that keeps us alive. Noticing this breath without taking it for granted. This very special moment. Being able to breathe. So as we breathe in, you might notice the breath coming in at the nose or the mouth. And breath coming in here, going out. You might notice your breath at the chest area. The in-breath expanding, chest, and contracting on the out-breath. And you might notice the breath at the abdomen. Sense of the abdomen swelling on the in-breath, falling back on the out-breath. So as you breathe, and keep breathing, staying alive, noticing where you're feeling the breath the most vividly. Which part of the body? There's no right way to do this. Just checking into your own breath. The rhythm of it. Feeling also your body, sensations in the body in this moment. So expanding your awareness again to feel the feet on the floor and the bottom on the seat, just sitting here, present in your life. Sensations as the hands make contact with the body, or with whatever they're holding. Noticing different sensations in the body. Maybe expanding even further to acknowledge the sounds around you. The sounds in the room, sounds outside. A taste for the spaciousness when you connect into the sounds in your world. Now reconnecting your awareness with the breath. Breath where you feel it the most vividly. Going to use the breath as an anchor. As I move into a compassion practice, maybe you like to stay with the breath if you're not wanting to go with my words, or come back to the breath at any point, should you feel the need for the anchor of the breath. So, bringing to mind now someone, something that you love. Could be a child, could be a loved one, could be an animal, pet. Just letting this presence come into your mind, opening to the feeling that you have when you think about someone, something that's easy to love. Maybe feeling the sense, the center of the chest, the warmth. Maybe feeling a smile as you think about them, an internal smile. And wishing they were well, wishing the best for them. If it feels okay, saying to yourself, may you be well, may you be safe, may you be happy, may you have ease. Now bringing this same sense of well-being to yourself, sense of wishing yourself well, sense of having a warm feeling towards yourself in this moment. A smile towards yourself. If it feels right for you, you might like to place your hand on your chest. Feel the warmth. So you're giving yourself a virtual hug, feeling the warmth of contact. or maybe just rubbing your arm, sense of comfort. Wishing yourself well. May I be well. Saying to yourself, may I be safe. May I be happy. May I have ease in my life. And then just opening up to whoever comes into your mind. Maybe the other people that you love in your life. People that you've seen on the screen earlier. Friends, family, loved ones. Maybe moving that out to people you don't know so well, somebody you might have bumped into today. Moving that even further to all beings near and far, known and unknown. Wishing them well. And you might have one or two that you think, well, not him, not her. And just perhaps having a little smile at that thought, letting it go. And wishing all beings well. May all beings be well. All beings be safe. All beings be happy. All beings have ease in their life. And notice the thought of the impossibility of that, but setting that intention of wishing the world well as a place to come from, no matter how impossible. That care you have for other beings is a place to start the work, the action towards giving to other beings. The world certainly needs it right now. I'm going to ring the bells to finish. So we did think that it might be something for people if they wanted to just to put a word in the chat, which we would see, and we'll perhaps read out some of the words before we have our break. Yeah, does that sound okay, Stefan? Do we have time for that?
Yes, we have time, yeah. So the chat is open to everyone. And if you just want to kind of enter a word and yeah, I will read them out. And also, as you're doing that, feel free to start going into a break. If you need some refreshment or a bathroom break, do so. And then we'll start again at, 5 after the hour. So we see lovely lady, lovely practice. Lovely, Annee, thank you. Calm, yes. So just one word, yes. Yes, yeah. And we'll share the longer comments, with Annee later. Deep gratitude, warmth. Some word probably in Welsh, which I'm not even going to pronounce. Beautiful, thank you so much. Today's practice brought me in touch with that again. Yeah, peacefulness, inspiring, recentered, warmth and connection, grounding, thank you, peace. Thank you for the translation. Love and grateful, gratitude, a lot of love, lots of gratitude and warmth. A sense of ease, wonder, wonderful, inspiring. Brought back some memories, inspiring, much gratitude for your presence, Annee. Calm, yes. Gratitude. Yeah, thank you all. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, we were going to ask you to write any questions that you wanted to address to me in the chat, so that at 8 o'clock or thereabouts I could answer the questions that come up. I can't, obviously, if there's lots of questions, we'll just sort of try to amalgamate them, get them. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Annee. Yeah, and yeah, it's been great to feed the wolf of compassion during this time for sure.
Welcome, Jody and Francis. And it is a pleasure for me to introduce to you Jody Mardula. Francis will get introduced by Oliver. And Jody was my supervisor until she retired. I met her. It's such a pleasure to see you again, Jody. Your smile. I remember those lovely conversations we had, your mischievousness, your depth of knowledge, your laughter, and your clarity, and sometimes your very strong opinion. All that what makes you so special. And I could see that even in the days when we started to talk about the book and this book launch. So there is something about Jody that those of us who have trained with you, have worked with you, that we will so much cherish. And for those who don't know you, you were a senior psychotherapist, a trainer, a supervisor. You wrote articles, contributed to books. You were addiction counselor, and as far as I know, you built up some addiction counseling services. And you were obviously the director of the Center for Mindfulness Research and Practice in Bangor until your stroke happened, and then you had at one point to retire. But the Jody I see today, she hasn't retired. She's still the Jody. She is Jody. Whatever makes you Jody, it shines through, and that is so beautiful to see. And I'm so glad that you have written this wonderful book. Every day I say to people they should buy it. It's very readable, and you help us to enter into a world. You take us into the inner world that you are experiencing. And it comes from your first person perspective, but we can join you in. And your drawings are beautiful. They help us to join you on this journey. And with this in mind, and I'm knowing I'm sitting far away from you, where Francis sits next to you. I'm looking forward to hand over to Oliver, who will introduce Francis. And then you will give us a taste of this wonderful book by introducing us to the pictures you have drawn that are such an essential part of that book. Thank you for letting me introduce you.
Oh,
So,
thank you, Helen. Lovely introduction.
and now I'm handing over to Oliver to introduce Francis.
Hello there, everybody, and thank you, everyone, so much for what's been a really wonderful and very peaceful evening for me, actually. It's just what I needed in my life at this stage, I can tell you. So I've known Frances for a long time, several decades. What to say about her? I mean, I think, firstly, she has a substantial history as a clinical neuropsychologist in North Wales of enormous import. I think dementia, Frances, is probably at the heart of many of your interests, but you've been really widely spread across a range of neuropsychological difficulties and disorders. And you worked for a very long time in the North Wales Brain Injury Service, NUBIS. I noticed that we have a couple of people from NUBIS here this evening, where you've had a reputation for humanity and compassion that spreads far and wide. I think I saw Rudy on the call earlier. Many people in our call here won't realize that Rudy refers to Frances' mother, Vaughan. I think because of her caring and supportive role in that community. And I also saw Christian Salas on the call here earlier, who you've been enormously helpful with over a long period of time, who I presume is watching from Santiago, Chile, which is really amazing. And not only have you had a history as a clinician, but also a really substantial amount of involvement in research, a very wide range of projects that you've been involved with across the years, not only in Bangor, but also before. And I'm also aware of your history in the teaching of clinical neuropsychology on various modules that we've taught, but also as the director of the clinical neuropsychology program many years ago. So thank you again for all of that. I think I was thinking about it, you've enriched neuropsychology in North Wales in so many ways, and you've also enriched the lives of people in North Wales in so many different ways, and I'm enormously grateful for all of those. So I'm going to save my questions for after you've had the chance to have your discussion with Jody, but thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to read the book and think about it in relation to both of you. It's been absolutely wonderful, and I'm really looking forward to the next bit. So Frances, I don't know if you'd like to say a few words about Jody's history at this stage.
That's right. Yes, it would be good to set the scene, really, because people coming to this from the mindfulness perspective may not know very much about the basis of this book, which was Jody's stroke, which is a type of stroke called a subarachnoid hemorrhage. It happened very suddenly. It was a very, very serious medical emergency for Jody, who could easily have died in the process. She had a rupture of an artery that goes into the back of the brain called the basilar artery, although you like to call it the basilica artery, don't you?
Do I get it wrong?
No,
No,
I'm not. It's just this lovely word.
Yes.
Basilica, it's great. So it had a weakness in the wall, this basilar artery, and eventually it became so weak that it ruptured and the blood came spilling out, and it went into, it went all around Jody's brain. The reports from the scan and from the surgeon said that the bleeding was very widespread, and the blood went into the gap between two of the meninges, the coverings, the very fine coverings around the outside of the brain. But it's very, very irritating and causes a lot of injury potentially to the rest of the brain, even though it's not in direct contact with it. So I think probably for me, the most important thing about the stroke that Jody had was that it was very diffuse. It affected a large part of her brain, and consequently there were a lot of consequences for Jody. It wasn't just one particular part of the brain that was affected, affecting one particular area of life. It was a lot of stuff across the board that happened. I think that's probably, apart from, oh yes, Jody needed some surgery to make sure that it didn't bleed again. So she had a tiny coil inserted into the the ruptured aneurysm, which was done up through an artery in her leg. So it went all the way up through her using the microsurgical techniques. So she was assured that it was unlikely to bleed again. And really the rest of it is about the recovery from that medical emergency, both initially as in an acute hospital situation, and then long-term at home, and as Jody went back to work. And that's what a lot of the book is about, that long process of recovery. Yeah.
And I think what was so special about the book, and that's why we decided that Jody would use the drawings to take us on this journey, because Jody, you described so beautifully, you take us into the journey, how you were affected, and we are alongside with you. And then at the end of the chapters, Frances gives us some understanding. So I was wondering, just before you take us a bit on this journey, which this book is about, can you just let me know, and possibly the others, how it came about that the two of you met and were writing this book? Because it is really a shared project.
You're asking me that because now I'm not quite sure. Hang on a minute.
It's okay. Oh, do you want to say?
No, because I'm going to take a while to remember.
Okay.
How did I meet you?
Well, originally we met at the university because you were director of the Mindfulness Centre, and I was working with Oliver on a project about, well, part of it was about teaching mindfulness to people who had a brain injury. So I went to Jody and talked to her about using the materials from the centre, and we talked about ways that they might need to be adapted and things like that. So that's how we first got to know each other. And then later you had your stroke, and we bumped into each other in the brain injury service. Do you remember I didn't recognise you? You recognised me, which because I think you'd been quite poorly, so I don't think I immediately saw that it was you. And then I started coming to see you, and I can't really remember how, I mean, just casually, I just used to come here and have a cup of tea. It was really nice. And you started talking to me about your stroke and about your life and the recovery. And it was just so amazing to me to listen to the descriptions that you gave of your experience, you know, what it felt like on the inside. And I said that I just knew that this was amazing. I mean, because you are so good at describing things and you have such insight into, you know, your own experience and so reflective. But I also knew that people with a brain injury aren't often able to have this level of reflection and vivid description. And I didn't realize at the time, but you'd also written it all down in your journals and you'd drawn your pictures. So I said to you, I think we should eventually, I mean, not obviously the first time, but after a little while, I said, I think that we should write a book together. You know, that you should write your story, as you already had in a way, but put it all together. And I should write about the neuropsychology side of things. And you thought I was crazy to begin with. because you didn't realise how unusual you were. And
it's hard to recognise.
It's very hard to recognise. Yes, of course, you wouldn't realise that.
Because I loved it. I thought, great, I'm unusual. What a great thing to be unusual.
Yes. And of course, Jody is unusual.
Exactly, Jody. You are very unusual. You are very, that is so beautiful about this book. So thank you. You already get us a flavor just seeing the two together, how well that book worked together. So would that be a good time now that you start? Would that be now a good time to go into the slides? Because Jody, you felt that would be very helpful for you to show us the drawings and then talk a bit about them so that we get a flavor of that book, how it takes you on that journey.
But Jody would like to read something first.
Yeah, great.
An introduction to that. I think
thank you. Good. Fantastic.
Do you think that's a good idea? No? So planning on the hoof here.
Yeah.
Right. So, what I'd written this morning was simply those sort of practical things like waking up and thinking, what will I wear? And don't forget breakfast. And then recognizing that we were going to give this talk and wondering, well, thinking that we'd better have a look at how we were going to do it, actually, because we hadn't really done that, or not to my satisfaction anyway. And what happens is that things go very quickly. So I know if I just talk, so she'll be asking me questions, which make it much easier. What tends to do, I quite often just go blanks. So for me, memory is, there's these blank, forgotten rabbit hole spaces. So I have to have all these things to remind me all the time. And quite a lot of this house is like that. There are things up that just spark memories of things. So even to get to this, I have to have that going on. And I thought, well, people are often quite interested in that because I don't think people realise what a lot of background rebuilding goes on just in every day with brain injury. It won't just be me, I'm quite sure. And it's rather like my brain takes time out. You know, I'm sitting talking or something happens and it just goes. It takes time out now. And that's quite unpleasant, but again, it's not that unpleasant. So just there's two places I can go to. There's one where it's like a forgotten box, and we're probably all a bit more familiar with that. Just things that just go. I've got quite a deep one with a lock on it. But the other one is being robbed out. And I just wanted to get that image across because I think it's one of the, I'm very happy living the way I do. One of the things that's a distressing one is the sense of being rubbed out. So it's a bit like you go home and often we forget things, don't we? I think we're more familiar with the idea of putting it in a box. So I forgot it, but it will come back. But what I often experience is it's not in a box, it doesn't come back, it's being rubbed out. And I'm saying that because the idea of doing this at all is not just for me to talk about myself, which I actually love doing, so thank you guys. But it's for other people, because I am able to talk about that. I think it possibly have more insight than people often have and can articulate. But I imagine is that mixture of being a mindfulness teacher and being a psychotherapist. So those two things, I think that's really what we needed to say.
And Jody, thank you, because that would have been my other question. What was your motivation? Why did you write this book? And that is beautiful. You answered the question before I was able to ask you. Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, welcome. I also like talking about myself.
But you do it in such a lovely way that, that I totally enjoy that. And I can see others smile here on the screen as well. But I wonder, Francis, Jody, what do you think? Would that now be a good time to show, to go a bit into the drawings and see, Francis, you have something prepared, and Jody you felt that would be a good idea. So I think I'm stepping a bit back and see what Stefan will bring up, and Jody will talk. Yeah.
Mixture of us talking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mixture of us talking.
So could we have the next one, please, Stefan? The tsunami.
Yeah.
Okay. So would you like to start off saying something about
what that is?
About what that is, the tsunami picture, yes.
Well, that was me. All of these I drew as things were happening. I do that. I've done that for years. I write a sort of journal that's often drawing. And luckily, I was still able to do that. Lots of times I really thanked whoever allows these things to happen, that I could still draw. I didn't mind so much not being able to cook or do things like that. Drawing, yeah. And that is I think the words I use are something like a volcano erupted in my mind.
Yeah.
And so it felt like that. That's how I drew it. I could sort of feel it, this movement. And that was it. That was the blood coming out. And obviously it doesn't come out of your head, it's inside, but that was the sensation. Yeah.
We thought you might read just a little bit that Jody wrote about that experience, just briefly.
Yeah, I think that gives us a good taste of that landscape. Thank you.
The image of a tsunami of the brain came to me about 5 months later, after hearing about the terrible Japanese earthquake and tsunami that had swept over the land, washing away whole cities. It was as if I saw blood-red waters rising up and sweeping through my brain, swirling waters of blood, ripping up memories and knowledge and how the world looked, hurling it all about, and how when the waters receded, the landscape of my brain was changed. That is what I could feel in my head, nothing but the screaming of the blood rushing through the territory of my brain, rearranging things, sweeping away familiarity, objects destroyed, moved and changed. Could we have the raft picture now, Stefan, please?
Yeah.
So, you going to say something about the raft?
So after that, that sensation of all this going on, this would be what then happened. When you have something like this, you're on stretchers, you're on things all the time. First of all, the ambulance may come with a stretcher, then you're in and out of ambulances and bed places, and then you're put on a trolley and wheeled around, and then you're in a bed and wheeled around. And just that sense of being completely helpless just like on the sea. So the image was very much of that. And that was pleasant, I think, having that kind of image of the sea. But you just get wheeled around. Does that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember from reading that chapter that you spoke about that it was comfortable. You spoke about the darkness that was warm. So there was some sense of being held and cared for.
Or being looked after and wheeled.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I think there's a couple of things, aren't there, from there, that sense of being looked after.
Yeah.
And I don't know, the other thing around that was this sort of sense of going towards the light or something. And then later on, I think I was still on the trolley, you're being wheeled around all the time. I could hear certainly my son and my daughter-in-law's voices.
Yeah.
And there was just all of that. And it was very like being on the sea.
Yeah. And you also brought in then touch. You spoke about, you heard the voices and then there was the touch. Yes. And there's a lovely part where the touch of your children and their voices called you back and connected you to this land.
That's what I want to do. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing, that sense of memory when you're in a place like that. But it was the movement, so very like on the sea, and the sense of corridors, and then these voices which were there. Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Jody. Shall we go to the next picture?
Where are the pictures? Oh, they can see the pictures.
Yes.
You chose this one. It's wonderful. Yeah.
So you want me to talk about that now?
Yeah.
Well, this was once I'd got come back from hospital and started to go out. So I don't know, didn't go out for a while, and then I found I had to walk with a stick. And going out and walking just down to the village, this was a sort of sense almost. It was a sense of being on a bridge, and go. That's it. That says it really. I don't need to say much about that.
Shall I read what you wrote? Because it's very powerful.
Oh,
is that
great.
okay? Very, very briefly.
Anything powerful.
I knew I was no longer in that old pre-hemorrhage world. I was on a bridge. I had gone through the gate and was walking slowly along a narrow bridge high above the sea. It was a rope bridge, wobbly, high, fragile, and I could not turn around. The end was too far away to see. I could only be in this moment with this step. The old world was behind me and beyond the gate.
Yeah.
And it was after that that you started going out a bit more. You realised you were in this new world, and that was when you went down to Brighton.
Yes,
that was
somewhere quiet.
A journey of discovery about how things had affected you.
Oh yes, I did. I went down to Brighton. My daughter was living down there, and my son-in-law met me at the station. And very naively, I sort of thought I was better, and because I wasn't. Because everything was a bit like being on a rope bridge. I just went on to something else that was very disconnected, really. Not unpleasant, but I sort of needed leading around.
And I like that image because it's really a wobbly path between two lanes. And you speak about, I was learning the new normal. Others look for us to return to being as before, to be the same as them. But the widened perception of brain injury, the different ways of pacing, noticing, and being in the world is simply a new normal. And I think that weaves through your book how important that is for people to understand that there is no way back. And that is, again, so touchingly described in your book. That the invitation to see the new normal, the Jody that we see now.
And that phrase came from Samantha Harper, who may be here, you know, who'd been through the same thing and whom I met after. And that phrase, which I think is used quite a lot, about a new normal, and that's what you have to learn, really.
Samantha, you say that in that chapter. You describe that you got it from her, and it's really a beautiful expression. Thank you.
Yes, it is.
And one that's being used quite a lot at the moment as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
with the COVID, the new normal. Yeah. Shall we go to the next one? Thank you, Stefan.
You want me to talk about it?
I think it needs to be interwoven.
Okay. So this is when you go into the mountains, because you spend quite a lot of time in the mountains. Quite a few chapters are written there. And really it's your journey of discovery after you've been over the rope bridge and you've realised that things are not going to be the same anymore.
I'm having an aside talk now.
Okay.
When do you put the newer bits in?
Later.
Oh, not on top of it.
Not at the same time. No.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that little. So where have we got to now then?
So this is you going into the mountains.
Yeah.
And being in the mountains was really a journey of discovery for you. Yes. Do you want to say something about that?
Yes. I was just wondering when the newer bits were going in.
Okay.
I thought it would be quite good if it was here. So this next bit is having got over the bridge. Just that really, that there was just nothing, just this sort of wilderness, and you just kept going.
There were things that you did in the mountains that were really important. There was Toby for a start. It was up there.
Okay, so that's what you want me to do, talk through the pictures. Okay, I've got it now. Can people see the map behind? Can you check with people? Can they see the map?
I think Stefan has got it. Stefan, do you think you could bring it back up so we could see it on the screen?
Yes, I will do that.
Yes,
that might be helpful. Yeah,
it would be. Can you do that, Stefan?
There we are. We can see it now. Thank you.
Okay,
We
great.
have
So if everyone can see that, I think that makes it easier for you to talk to as well. If I move, you're still going to be able to see me. Yeah. So the lightning bolt of the stroke is up there, and then when I went off and sort of tried to go back into the world, that was the sense, really. There was this extraordinary sense of being very disconnected from the world that I'd known before.
Yeah.
So the lightning bolt and the bit before the bridge, I just didn't belong there anymore. And I think that's an interesting thing I always want people to know about that, for people who are looking after people with brain injury. I think I'm probably quite lucky in that I could articulate quite a lot of this sort of thing, and I can draw things. I'm quite sure that a lot of people that have what I've had may not have that way of communicating.
Yeah.
And I felt very fortunate to have that, because I don't think I could have communicated it in words.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense.
Completely. Yeah.
And so the idea of it being a journey, an extraordinary journey as well, sort of brings in a real positive, really, to something which you could think of in a very unpositive way, because there's an awful lot of losses as well. So, is this working?
Yeah, I think it is.
Having gone over the bridge, which sort of took a while with my stick, then walking towards the mountains, that was a period I had to begin to learn to drive again. I think I did that a bit nearer the mountain end, and aim towards going back to work. So there was quite a lot of relearning that went on.
Yes, definitely. And discovery, finding out how this had affected you, because the more you tried to do, or the more you wanted to do, the more you discovered whether you could, your strengths and your weaknesses, whether you could do it or not.
Yes.
Yeah. Especially as you mentioned, learning to drive the car. That was really amazing how you worked out how to drive the car again, to do it in daylight, and how sat-nav was too much a talking voice. So it was really, again, helping us to understand.
Yeah.
First time we learned to drive, it's too much. The indicator, the light, the steering wheel, the accelerator, the clutch, and then it becomes autopilot. And for you, there was the additional overload with driving, and the perception had changed around speed. So it was even more than learning to drive. You had to still cope with all the different perception. That was it just showed the effort you had to take, the hard work it was just to function again.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well how I could still drive. The automatic pilot bit of driving was there.
Eventually.
Well, it must have been, or I wouldn't be able to drive.
It took you a long time to learn it, though.
Yeah.
Did it? Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
She's right. But then when I was out driving, there's such a lot more that becomes automatic to us once we're drivers, of all the instructions, all the things you've got to follow. And I know what my most difficult one was. I get so cross with the sat-nav, because it tells you to turn left, and you turn left to a roundabout, and before you've finished doing it, it tells you to turn right. Now, if you've got a brain injury, that doesn't compute. That sort of just would stop me.
Yeah.
Because, and that just was another interesting discovery, that sat-navs don't account, obviously, for brain injury. But they're very confusing when you're going around all of that stuff about roundabouts, because we give one instruction on top of another.
Yeah.
And actually that happens quite a lot in life, and we probably don't notice it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that was me ranting on about.
No, that was
because they're very difficult to manage.
Yeah. Now I wonder, we have not time to go through all the slides, and I was wondering, there was something about building a camp that Jody felt was very important, but I can see Jody looking at her map.
It's a long way. That's several years on.
Yeah.
Not have time
Do you want to choose one of the other ones?
Yeah. Can I just, like, if I just sort of do a very quick summary along that, because from that and the driving and then up into the mountains, and I got with my dog, Toby, who's here, being very, very good,
so far.
And back to work. And that relearning, I think the effort involved in all the relearning, back to work, going to the shops, going to the supermarket, we seem to surround ourselves with things with flashing lights and
yeah.
And then as I come down, and I get Toby up there, said that. And then as I come down, I have the second hemorrhage, which was just a couple of weeks before my daughter's wedding. Felt like a bit of a disaster. And then I got up and trundled on again. So I've got 2 brain hemorrhages now with different, that brought in new and different difficulties, which I can't actually remember just now. Can you say something about that?
Yes, it was quite subtle to begin with. Nobody thought that anything very much had happened. You weren't in hospital for very long.
No operation.
But really, it was a bit of a setback. It wasn't in proportion to the seriousness, the medical seriousness of what had happened. Because I think psychologically it was a big step back for you. You went into a rather dark place. You were perhaps mildly depressed. You were more aware of how both of the hemorrhages had affected you, both of them. Yet you were more inclined to ruminate about things, and you were less accepting. This rather positive, the new eyes, the acceptance that you brought to everything after the first hemorrhage, it disappeared for a little while. And it came back. And the story about, in the book, the story about the 2 wolves, which Annee did so beautifully,
yes, we've got the
which we both got the stories, that was associated with you sort of coming back a little bit from that and coming out of the woods, and then you went on to build the camp, which was here really. It was your haven. It was protection against the hubbub of the outside world. But it was only really then that you came out of this rather dark time, and you had the hum as well, which was very difficult. The hum, sort of like almost like a tinnitus, but not quite. So there was an awful lot going on after the second stroke that you wouldn't really have expected to have happened, because it wasn't that serious, and yet it did really put you back in terms of
and resulted in me leaving work and things as well. Is
that fair enough?
Yes.
Jody, I was just wondering, we are, from the time-wise, we are slowly possibly moving, is that correct, towards Francis? But I wonder, because you wanted to do a short practice with us.
I'd forgotten about that.
That was the owl practice.
Should we do that quickly? Yeah.
I think that would be nice, would that be okay? Can the 2 of you will be in tune there?
Yes. You happy with that?
Yeah. I'll do a short practice, and a slightly different one perhaps, because it's using an owl. This is because, most of you, I think, are probably meditators here. I know very well that not everybody is. And Annee did the practice earlier on, which is how we usually practice, which would just be going in and listening to the words. But what I found after having the brain hemorrhage is that I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't, it's a strange thing, if I closed my eyes, I couldn't have any thought. There was a whole lot and I couldn't do it. And somehow I discovered, I can't remember how, it must have been one of my, I think it was Alice. Either Alice or no, I've got 2 of my grandchildren. I have to mention Jessie as well here now. Had an owl puppet, finger puppet. And for some reason, I can't remember, I picked it up, and then I found that if I squeezed it, I could breathe with it, and that could lead me in the practice of breathing.
can I just say that this was quite not that long ago. It was after you had your dementia diagnosis.
Oh, was it?
So this wasn't.
Oh, it was.
This is
I've
quite
jumped
late.
ahead.
No, it's fine. It's fine. But it's such a good one. So please, I just thought I'd mention that it wasn't right at the beginning because you were you were good at practice after a while.
I must have been using something a bit different. I think I was using something.
Yeah.
But it needed something to take the attention.
Yeah, and I think exactly in the books and lots of small, beautiful practices. I just recently used one in my Sunday class, reading that out. Very simple with feeling body and feeling your breath and getting ready for the day. And that is later on, and that is wonderful, that combination with the breath. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, would that be okay the two of you? Is there anything?
I don't know what to do. Got to read the practice. Which practice one? What do you want to do?
No, you can do it, but I'll do this first. So the practice that I'm going to do is using the owl. It could be any object. It was just that I rather liked the owl, and of course the idea of the owl seeing in the dark. But in order to direct my brain with just words, it didn't work. So by having this thing, it could have been anything, a ball or whatever, squeezing in and out, and then breathing with it. Mm. So that was the only way that I could really meditate.
Yeah.
So yes, Frances will ring. My beautiful assistant will ring the bell, and I'll do. And I'll do a short practice for those of you that don't meditate. So for this practice, I'm holding the owl in my hand. Really, you need to have something to hold in your hand. So just inviting people, if they're willing to do that, maybe to take a bunch of clothing or something, or just a fist, and then put your attention on the fist that you have closed. And let yourself just sit, close your eyes if you're happy to do that, or look down. And squeeze and release the hand. So you're squeezing in and letting go. You can have your hand resting on your knee. You can do this anywhere. Breathing in, breathing out. So like the hand is also breathing. You can have your eyes closed or not. Bringing the attention to the hand. Notice that thoughts will probably go off. Just coming back to the sensation of breathing in and breathing out. If you're holding the toy as I am, I would be breathing in and squeezing the toy and letting go. And rather than trying to force, for me, my tired brain to think in breath, out breath, you then let the hand do it for you. So rather than thinking, breathing in, breathing out, as you squeeze your hand in, whether it's got an owl in it or not, you think breathing in, and you breathe in. You release your hand and you breathe out. Just that. Whether you're a meditator or not, perhaps just sitting for a few moments, squeezing your hand and breathing in, and releasing the hand and letting go. Breathing in, breathing out. Bringing all the attention to that, so we're letting go of the thoughts and all the usual busyness of the day, and just putting attention on the in-breath and the out-breath. Let it being a natural thing to do. And now my beautiful assistant will ring the bell. And coming out of that practice. And it's simply an example of another way of practicing, a way the beginners might practice, but I had to do the point around this, I lost it a bit, that with the brain injury, I could not just sit down in absolute silence and practice. I had to have something physical sort of ground it and do it for me. So a bit like quite a young child in a way. Owl was doing that for me. And I know that for me, that was a huge discovery about this, which I keep on wanting to write up about, tell the people at the brain injury clinic about, which is where Frances works. Because I think when you have a brain injury, that could be very difficult. I often see people with brain injuries being taught mindfulness for the first time. And I've now be thinking, they should all have an owl or something.
Yeah. Thank you, Jody. Thank you so much. That was lovely. I think it's really shining through how much that book has to offer. And I'm now handing over to Oliver. As you already suggested, that comes now the part where we get a deeper understanding. So Oliver will now interview Frances. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you for what's been a marvelous evening. I think having this double act in front of us here in many ways reflects the double act that is the book itself. It's not very common in our world of neuropsychology to have a personal first-person account written by a patient together side by side with an account by a clinician, by a neuropsychologist. The most famous of them all, I mentioned to Frances a little while ago, is Alexander Lurie's book almost 50 years ago now, The Man with the Shattered World, who had a brain injury during the Second World War and was written up by Alexander Lurie, the famous neuropsychologist. So this reminded me a bit of that. And I think it's lovely to see things reflected. And I was sitting here, listening to Jody and trying to guess which words Frances might use to describe the various things that Jody so evocatively gives her first-person account of. So, with that in mind, I've got a couple of questions that I'd like us to run through. And I think the first of them, given the unusual double act nature of this all, is to ask Frances what the main purpose of your section of the book was.
Well, thank you, Oliver, and thank you for coming tonight and taking part in this. I really appreciate it.
Right.
Well, I wrote my part of the book. I think we both did, really, but just speaking particularly about mine, with the person with a brain injury and their families in particular in mind. I was writing it sort of to them, hopefully in language that people without a psychological, medical, whatever background would be able to understand. And so that they could read Jody's story and then hopefully understand a little bit more than she'd already said about the nature of the problems that she had. And I have to say that Jody almost did me out of a job anyway, because she wrote so many wonderful things about the nature of her experience as she had it that I almost didn't need to say. I almost didn't need to say very much more on top of that. But there were some areas where it was helpful to have another perspective and to go into things in a little bit more depth. So just jumping back a little bit. So I wanted people to understand a little bit more about the nature of the problems that Jody was experiencing and had described. And I think, like Jody, I wanted in particular to emphasize the hidden wounds. Jody has a phrase in the book called the hidden wounds, which refers to difficulties that people can't necessarily see. So when somebody has a stroke or a brain injury, often the most debilitating, perhaps the most distressing parts of what happens to them are the things that people are not necessarily very obvious. So these are changes in cognitive function, might be attention, might be memory, things that are not particularly obvious, changes in personality that are not obvious unless you know the person really well, changes in emotional response and mood, and behavior that people on the outside might not see. So it's really important to flag up that even though somebody might make a very good physical recovery after a stroke, for example, at home they might not be doing as well, and their family might be struggling to deal with that, and the relationships might be severely affected by those hidden wounds that are not necessarily obvious on the outside. So that was one of the things I wanted to put across. And I think also, even when problems are very visible, when people can see the difficulties that are going on, they're not necessarily that easy to understand. And people generally, as human beings, we have a tendency to make assumptions and sometimes to misinterpret what's happening. So I want people to get something from this book about having an open mind and being willing to ask questions, and perhaps not to make to make the assumptions that come naturally about what's going on, because I think quite often that leads to a lot of another layer of suffering, of difficulty, and you lose the opportunity to do something helpful about the situation instead. And I think there was one more thing that I really wanted to put across, which I'm not sure what you would think about this, Oliver, because you're much more of a purist than I am. But there are lots of different kinds of brain injury and strokes, and lots of different parts of the brain that can be affected. And the strokes and the brain injuries have lots of different consequences. There's a huge amount of variation. But at the core of it, it seems to me, from my clinical experience, there are certain things that a lot of people complain about, have difficulty with, want to talk about, get very distressed about. And they are common to a very wide range of brain injuries and strokes. And that's really what the book is about. And those were the kinds of things that Jody was highlighting in her writing. So those, for me, they were the most important things that I wanted to put across.
Without me knowing I was doing that.
Without you knowing that you were doing it. Yeah.
Well, there's a few very good reasons. I do agree with you about the last one, by the way, Frances, in case you're about it. I wondered just, you've talked about the very wide range of neuropsychological difficulties that Jody has struggled with. And you made a little list a few minutes ago also about those. I wonder maybe even to choose one of them to talk about, how a neuropsychologist would see or label a particular thing, and what Jody's sort of first-person perspective is on the same phenomenon. She described some things to me, that looked like attentional impairments, for example. I was particularly taken with the owl practice. So, anything you might want to say about the nature of her neuropsychological difficulties?
Well, I think on the cognitive front, and I would like to say, because we might not have enough time to say it, that my part of the writing is divided into two parts. The first part is a series of sections about cognitive difficulties, and the second part is about coming to terms with a brain injury or a stroke, which is much more to do with emotional adjustment to change, involving things like acceptance and changes in sense of self. Those kinds of issues, which are very different to the cognitive side, but are very important. So the book's in two halves, and out of the first, my part of the book is in two halves, and out of the first half, I think probably I would choose attention to highlight, which I think is what you just said, Oliver, because Jody had really quite severe problems with attention, particularly in the beginning, but all the way through, and they affected almost everything else that she did, because that's what attention does. It forms a sort of platform, a support for all of our other cognitive abilities. And it seemed to be particularly important as well because of its effect on your ability to practice mindfulness, do formal practices. To begin with, Jody really didn't have the ability to sustain her attention without being distracted for very long. And that was really quite difficult, and you built it up, didn't you? You practiced and practiced with great determination.
And again, using an external object, an owl.
But these problems with attention were immensely far-reaching for Jody, because she lost her filter. Her brain was bombarded by every sensation that we normally manage to filter out and are not aware of. So any kind of busy environment was really overwhelming for you. Your brain had slowed down. It wasn't able to process information, and it wasn't able to process much information or as quickly. And so you had a feeling that you couldn't keep up with the world. It was going faster than you could. So they're sort of quite simple attentional mechanisms that were really affected. But then you also had problems with being distracted. So you were easily distracted all of the time. But on the other hand, you sometimes got quite stuck. You would sit with your tapestry and you would be immersed in it for hours and hours. And it was almost as if Jody couldn't take her attention away from that focus.
That was pleasant.
Yes. But you described lots of instances of not being able to quite tear yourself away from things. So it was almost as if you couldn't control your attention. So you couldn't stop yourself being distracted, but you couldn't tear yourself away at other times.
I was very taken with that, actually, the preservation of automaticity. So there's some times in which Jody had much greater control and there were more automatic, overlearned parts of her life. And you find those reassuring and supportive. So I wonder if we could move on to that emotional side. I think it's so important for our for patients so often, and maybe turn to Jody and talk about the sort of emotional consequences of all of this for you, and how you tried to manage them, and which mechanisms you used to regain a sense of control.
At that time, well, what came to mind as you were talking just then, and I know my son is on here, and he came and visited me a lot after when I was at home, and we sat and I started to do jigsaws. I don't do jigsaws. I've never done jigsaws. I hate jigsaws. They're stupid, boring toys. But I don't know why. I went out and I bought I was in the RSPB Centre. I used to go there a lot, just watch the birds. And they sell things in the shop there. And there was a jigsaw and I bought it. And I did it. And my son used to come on and do some of it with me, which was fantastic. It's sort of activity of doing something together. Never in my life have I completed or done a jigsaw. I hate them. I loved it. I loved it. I sat there day after day. Finn will remember this, hour after hour. And the fact that it takes forever, that it's an extraordinarily boring activity, pointless. I didn't like the picture. The doing of it was hugely pleasurable. And that, I was amazed by it when it was a whole sort of new me, really.
And that was how you made you made yourself better, because you did all of that with such determination. I mean, that was the early stage, but it was so good.
That's what you're saying, the determination. It felt like that. It felt like being hungry. Hungry. My brain was hungry. It needed something. That's what it felt like. Yeah.
And Oliver was asking you about emotion as well.
And if there were any mechanisms apart from jigsaws that you used to try to manage your feelings?
Well, I think that's where mindfulness came in. I think I was very fortunate in already being a very experienced meditator. And so I didn't some of that, but the grounding and the awareness that was going on. I had an awareness that I needed to settle somehow, to not go into this ruminative thoughts or whatever it was, which I know now from talking to some other people, that doesn't necessarily happen for everybody. I was fortunate that I could still do that. I've got lost. Yeah, what were you asking me?
Manage your emotions.
Yeah. Well, that helped. I can't remember. How do you manage your emotions?
Meditation.
It was meditation.
And the cup and things like that.
Oh, the cup for meditation. I'd say I started to do, I think just because I was holding a cup, it's a bit like holding a bowl, a cup meditation. And that really helped because it was difficult for me to meditate. People that don't meditate don't know this, you have to you're following instructions really. You do this and this and this. And that was difficult for me. I could lose it. But by holding a bowl or holding the cup or something, I could sort of keep my attention on that I was holding it and breathing into it. It just kept me there and breathing and feeling contained. Yeah. So holding the object.
And imagining yourself sitting inside.
Yes, I've got a drawing of me sitting inside. One of my drawings is me sitting in the cup. And so really it was a way of self-soothing. It's a way of self-soothing.
Containing, yeah.
Our good friend and colleague Christian, who might be on this Zoom call still, often speaks about the importance of concrete things for some patients after brain injury. And I was really struck with the way that the owl was a very concrete way of you gaining some control over your breathing. And similarly, there's something holding the cup, which allows you to focus your attention.
And hold my whole self. Yeah.
It gives you a sense of control in a world which must often seem out of control, or must have seemed out of control.
Yes, because these are objects, aren't they?
It was a way of protecting yourself from this terribly busy, overwhelming environment. And the camp was like that as well. You went into the camp to get away from you were only here, but you felt like you were in a camp to escape from how awful it felt to be overwhelmed.
And I'm still in the camp.
You are still in the camp.
Yeah.
So Francis, just to turn to something else here, which is the balance between the cognitive and the emotional side of the book. You need to tackle both of them. And do you have any thoughts? As a neuropsychologist, I'm very interested in knowing how much space and detail you choose to allocate to those two sides in your writing.
I think probably there was slightly more written about the cognitive side, possibly because it's more complicated in some ways, and because there was an awful lot to say about Jody. I think I didn't write such a big commentary about Jody in the emotional side of things, but I wanted to convey something about the process that I know people generally go through, and to make that available to people. But I did use examples from Jody, particularly about her acceptance of the situation, and when her mood was low, and how that related to her self-awareness. So her awareness of the difficulty she was having emerged gradually over a period of years, and maybe when she became more aware of how she'd been affected, then your mood was lower. So I was sort of highlighting some things like that. But also, one of the biggest things that happened to Jody, perhaps not emotional, but in terms of a psychological change, was that she felt like she was a very different person after the first stroke. And this is a really, really important part of your writing, how you felt changed right from the beginning, when you looked in the bathroom mirror and you saw this person that you didn't really recognize. And this change in sense of self is absolutely pivotal for people. If they feel that they're a different person, it's so much harder for them to adjust emotionally and to come to terms with the changes, for all sorts of reasons I can't possibly go on to describe here, but this is what I've written about. And so I suppose for me, there's equal weight in terms of the importance of them, but also a sense that you have to understand, it's important to understand the cognitive stuff first, to understand the kinds of things that people are experiencing cognitively, the confusion, forgetting things, not being able to cope with the environment, all these kinds of things, not being as able as before, which impacts hugely on the person's sense of self and their identity, feeling that they are diminished as a person, not as good as they used to be, inadequate, and having to deal with the emotional impact of that. So it's really important to understand the first part perhaps before you can understand the second part. It is a sort of logical sequence in a way, but the emotional side of things and the process by which people come to terms with being changed as a person. I mean, it's very complex, and it's really challenging, because if a person has a completely different sense of who they are, if they're not aware of some of the problems that they have, if they're emotionally and psychologically in a place where they're raging against the difficulties they're having, raging against the brain injury, denying that they have difficulties, it's a huge challenge to help somebody move from a place like that to a place where they do feel greater acceptance of what's happened to them, and can come out saying, I've had a stroke or a brain injury, and these are the things that I now have to do to make my life more livable, and to be in a happier place, for want of a better way of putting it, to live their life again, rather than just being in an emotional turmoil about the loss that they've gone through, the things that have changed, and the way that they feel like they're not the same person anymore, not as good as they were before, all those kinds of things. It's a hugely complex area and a hugely complex process to go through, as Jody has told us, has described so vividly.
It's interesting listening to you saying that, because I was thinking, well, that sounds awful. I'm sure I didn't go into that awful. But I think what I was very lucky in, again, listening to what Frances is saying, was that I had a strong mindfulness practice.
Yeah.
And I had some self-awareness that this was going on. I knew that the difficulties that I were having was coming from some of this.
Yeah.
And I'm quite sure it would have been awful to not have that awareness.
Yes.
And that was a great help. Yeah. Does that make
yes,
sense?
it does.
Yeah.
And that's what brought you to the point where you could write about it and have that sort of insight.
And I was interested in it.
Yes, that's true. She was very, very interested.
And I think that helps.
Yeah.
You know, to be interested in the story.
Yeah.
Story
and understanding what it was.
And how it affects other people. And I had got some knowledge of brain injury because my eldest daughter had hydrocephalus as a baby and has got quite a lot of brain injury. So there was something in that, you know, those changes.
So you really had a sense of a changed identity, but also that you've now made a journey to acceptance of that. I think that's quite a common challenge, as you said earlier, Frances, in people almost like regardless of their brain injury.
Yes, absolutely. But Jody always brought an attitude of acceptance to her difficulties. I mean, it wasn't always there, it wasn't always 100%, but that was a natural way for you to, because of your mindfulness practice, it was a natural way for you to respond. And that is such an important part of the message of the book. But I mean, it can be done. It is possible for people to bring acceptance to the most difficult of circumstances.
I think again that possibly mindfulness, therapist mindfulness, I was curious about it. So there was this, I think right from the beginning, being wheeled around on those trolleys, and there was a sort of outside awareness of it. I think like that. I was curious about what was happening for me. My hunch would be not everybody does that. That somehow, I don't know.
Well, I think you are very unusual.
I'm unique, guys. That's what this is all about. And it's a combination. I got that knowledge. I got mindfulness, and I'm a psychotherapist, and I had a daughter with disabilities. This was not unfamiliar territory. She has brain injury. It wasn't unfamiliar. So I think that I was lucky in that because it must be awful to not have that awareness.
I think a lot of people are completely perplexed by what's happened to them in that situation, completely.
Okay, one last question, because time is, as always, continues, which is really, I think primarily aimed at you, Frances, but you might want to say something too, Jody, about it, which is, what would you hope that people would take away from the book? If there was a sort of central gift that you were offering them here in the publication, what do you think that would be?
It's a journey to be curious. A journey. It's to be curious around it, because it's so easy to just get into something being something dreadful. So I just think that helps, and it might help other people. I needed to do it for me, and I hoped also that might help trigger and help other people to see theirs in more of a story than perhaps just as a loss.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yes. And for people to see that it is possible to come out of some quite dark times and do very well. And even when you're not doing very well, to be able to use things to cope, to use your survival bag and your mindfulness to sit and breathe and be with whatever was there. That Jody coped with the difficulty using those strategies.
And just as you say that, I think perhaps that might be the helpful thing about meditation or about mindfulness, is that it's very about something you're doing in and for yourself. There's quite a lot of things that if you go to see some cognitive therapists and such like people, they give you things to do that are outside of yourself in a different way. I didn't find that way of building attention as useful as just going in and being with it.
And that came to you very naturally, didn't it? Because that was what you were used to doing. Yes.
And I wanted other people to add that to their repertoire if they could.
Well, can I say that you're a beautiful double act. It's a pleasure being able to watch the two of you interweave your narrative and pass a baton between you. It's been really lovely, and I've thoroughly enjoyed having an opportunity to ask a few questions.
Thank you, Oliver.
Oh, thanks.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Where are we, Stefan?
Yes, where are we?
Where is he?
Thank you, Oliver. I think we're reaching the Q&A section now, and I can see that there is a lot of love and gratitude being sent on the chat. Yeah, so the question is, it's about trust. How would you suggest that one cultivate trust in themselves, and how can they know and trust that actually they are feeding the helpful wolf rather than the unhelpful wolf?
Well, that's a question. Yes. Trust. It's a curious one, isn't it? I mean, I'm someone who, I won't say suffers, but one of my hindrances, if you like, is doubt. So it's kind of like the opposite to trust. So I've studied doubt quite a lot, but trust, sometimes doubt, you get to the end of doubt by acknowledging, this is doubt. Then there is a possibility of opening up to trust. This is how it works for me. And also this trust that all will be well, all shall be well. It's a massive one, isn't it? Feeding the good wolf. So I think we come back to intention, that I can only talk for myself, but I know from my friends and family, we have a similar striving for good in the world. So it is that intention that we wish for this, and that we're working, that we come back to ourselves. Which wolf am I feeding? When I notice myself feeling resentful or angry or impatient, then I can notice that, and notice that perhaps it's not really very helpful, that I'm not actually, my body is not enjoying it, that I'm tensing up, I'm gritting my teeth, I'm feeling horrible, and do I really want to feel like that? So in some ways, for me, it's useful sometimes to feel the opposite, and feel that, no, I don't like this. So what is the other quality? What's the quality, the good wolf quality, if you like, the quality of love for, positive feelings.
She's saying that there's
Grandma. So Jody, did you have something to add to that? I think you could really tell us.
Distracted by my grandson waving at me.
Oh, yeah, there he is.
That was all wrong. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, thank you very much, Annee. That was very helpful.
One question from Jenna. A sense I get from those I work with is avoiding their experience as it is too painful. So it's a question, do you feel that your curiosity helped you manage this? Or you didn't avoid painful experiences at all? And now we need to unmute Francis and.
Okay, there we are.
Okay, I think this is where mindfulness probably came in, or the general attitude, maybe from being a psychotherapist as well, or a sort of self-awareness, and that I knew that I can choose how I feel. I can choose how I respond to something. So if I'm in pain and things are difficult, and yeah, it was bloody awful a lot of the time. Sorry, not to swear on things. But my attitude to how I responded to that was what was important. And I would notice if I got into feeling very sorry for myself, or just how difficult it was, and do a meditation practice where I just let go of that. And not pushing it away and getting rid of it, but accept it's there, and also accept the other things that were there. I don't know if I'm answering the question now. Am I still on the question? And I had a way, there's all the way through there's been things that are difficult. It's difficult being recovered so much because there's so many things that I actually can't do anymore. You know, just dealing with lockdown, guys, the complications, the amount of times I've been shouted at for doing the wrong thing, because you've got to remember new things. I'm going off piste a bit here, I think. Did that answer that?
It was about avoidance, wasn't it? Was it about, yes, that you weren't avoiding.
No, I think I'm largely not, and I think that's the practice, to sit with difficulty.
You were aware of that.
I was aware it was there. I knew that pushing things away makes it worse. So I'd already got that as a life technique, actually, which I think I was very fortunate to have, and I'm very glad I didn't lose it. Because it's a difficult thing to have. It's difficult to have those changes and not be able to do things, and other people often don't understand, and they show you how to do it. And say, well, I've shown you. Yeah, not easy.
There was another question here. Is there another question coming in at the moment?
Right, I can't read it in the moment because yes. How was your journey from being unaware of the new abilities to coming to terms with it and accepting? So how was your journey from being unaware of the new disabilities to coming to terms with it and accepting, and your new abilities?
Well, it's a very long journey, and
yes, it's an up and down journey, all journeys are. A lot of the becoming aware. I'm very fortunate because I had people like Francis. I had a lot of people that I know who know what's going on. So understanding is a very helpful thing. I think if I hadn't have had that, to just be left with that not really understanding must be very much worse for people. And I've now lost track of what's the other bit of, there's another bit of the question, which was going to be about, I think the answer to was having a mindfulness practice.
It probably was. How was your journey from being unaware of the new disabilities to coming to terms with it?
Yeah. Well, the answer to that is it's very difficult, I think, because you suddenly go into something and find you can't do it. Going to Tesco's, God, going into Tesco's for the first time, thinking, oh, great thing, you get there, managed to get in, and then I think I just completely crashed on the first aisle because of the overwhelm. The noise going into somewhere like Tesco's, bright lights, there's noise around you, there's things moving, and again, imagine this, it's being mindful. I tended to observe what was happening. I knew what was happening to me. I knew I was feeling overwhelmed. I knew it was the noise and all the moving lights and the different things, and that I needed to just stop, breathe, and then I would walk out, not looking at things, because that's where the overwhelm came from. If I hadn't had a practice, if I hadn't been inclined to look at things in that way, I think it must be much harder for people. Yeah. I'm glad you asked that, because that's a huge thing. And it's still there, even all these years on. I can go in somewhere, get on something and have this overwhelm. But I have this way of dealing with it.
Somebody's asking about the practices with the owl and the cup and the bowl, whether they'd be helpful for people with general anxiety.
I think so. I think, I like to have objects to hold. A lot of our practices, although once you get into the body, and movement is very good, that takes our attention into our practice, our meditation. But I did find that really focusing on having something to lead, something external to lead, by just squeeze, let go. And I'm sure there's a whole variety of things individuals would do that would work for them in that. It's not so much that it's a squeeze or a toy that I happen to like. It's people finding something that will ground them, an external object, I suspect. Do you think that's what that is? Yeah. And I use that a great deal. If I go to the supermarket, Tesco's, still, I always have something.
One of the things that, sorry.
No, go.
One of the things that I noticed about when Jody wrote about her mindfulness meditation and improving things over time with the determination that she had, was that it was much harder for you to do things that were slightly more abstract. So body sensations and things were more difficult than having a physical
I needed objects. Yeah.
And you were very visual, and things needed to be tangible and something, and if you could hold it as well, it was even better. And that's been the way for you all the way through this.
Yes.
And your understanding of your brain injury has been mapped out in relation to objects and pictures and things that are very visual, very tangible. So if things can be just too abstract, and then they don't work.
They don't work. And I imagine I am very visual, so I could see why that would be so. But presumably people are very musical, or there are other things that will ground people in that way, if you can find that thing that they very easily connect to.
Yeah.
Because for me, certainly objects and pictures.
And also poetry. Because you learned loads of poems when you couldn't remember anything else.
Yes, that's interesting.
Which was a really interesting change, wasn't it? Fairly early on, you suddenly decided that you realised that you could learn poetry, and you learned your book of one a day.
I did.
A day.
And that was very interesting. You asked me a question about that. This sounds a bit crazy. I had a book with just little short poems in. I felt as if I was eating them. So when I read the poems now, it almost felt as if the words were going inside me. I wasn't remembering them in my head, because that's damaged. I was eating them, and that sounds completely crazy, but that was the experience. It's as if it went in by a different route.
There's a question from Fazana. Thank you, Fazana. She's asking a really complicated question.
Interpret.
I understand that Jody's a mindfulness practitioner. She was able to carry out all those gains in her life after stroke. Do you think both Jody and Frances, introducing mindfulness to someone after a stroke would be equally effective? Well, it's much more difficult, Fazana, I can tell you that, because I have done some work around that, and it is much harder for people. Imagine. But there are still gains to be had. People can use it perhaps in simpler, more tangible ways, and benefit in terms of their mood and their ability to regulate their own emotions quite often, or becoming more aware of things. I had one woman who learned to walk more steadily because she became more aware of her bodily movements through a sort of walking mindfulness practice. So things like that. But I think for Jody, it wasn't easy, but it was a lot easier.
Yes,
because it was there before.
I mean, I needed these external objects to do it, so that's...
Yeah. Yes.
I can see you all looking at us now. They go into what they're thinking. I don't want to know that.
Possibly a good time to draw it to an end, Stefan. I think maximum we thought 8:30. People would get tired. So many words of appreciation. Thank you for sharing your incredible journey with us. so unique and insightful. This will bring comfort and help to so many people.
I would like to thank you, Stefan. I think you've worked really, really hard to assist us along this journey. So thank you very much, and the Friends of Bangor for inviting us. So, and thank you everybody for coming. And I loved Jody's and Francis and Oliver's and Helen's part as well. So thank you for being part of it for me.
And I would like to thank everyone for coming, and for Stefan particularly, who's worked like a Trojan these last few weeks to herd us. It's been like herding cats. I know it's been difficult. And to you all for coming and joining in this evening. And to Annee, thank you. That was brilliant.
Yes, and echoing all the people you've just named. And yes, thank you. I know that very often people can't articulate the way that I can, the experience of having brain injury. And that seems like a real gift to me, and Francis has been such a big part of that. And also my family, everybody that supported me in recovering, and sort of getting thinking again and being able to start to use what happened to me in a useful way, really, because I can remember some of that and some of the recovery. And thanks everybody for coming. I love that. I always love people coming and listening to me. Thank you so much.
We should do more of that.
In the back
now
of
you're all welcome to unmute
in front of Vaughan.
So share your thanks as we leave the meeting. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Great.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you all. Wait back.